Well, let's talk about the collapse of the narcissist's false self, because when you walk away, and I mean truly walk away, not just physically, but psychologically and emotionally, what begins to fall apart is not just a relationship, it's a constructed identity. It's a mask. See, the narcissist's sense of self isn't stable, it isn't integrated. It's not grounded in a coherent moral framework or a developed personality. It's built like a stage set, impressive from a distance, but hollow when you knock on the back wall. And you are the lighting, the applause, the audience. Without you, the show doesn't just stop, the entire set begins to rot. Now, it's important to understand this dynamic through a psychological lens. The narcissist doesn't just lose someone. That's not what hurts them. What they lose is the scaffolding for their false self. Because your attention, your care, your emotional responsiveness, it all fed the illusion that they were powerful, desirable, special. That illusion is what they need to survive, because what lies beneath it is terrifying. A profound sense of inadequacy, shame, and emptiness. So, when you detach, flee cleanly, they're left alone with that inner void. And they don't have the internal architecture to withstand it. Most people operate with some degree of congruence between their internal world and their external behavior. That's what allows us to grow. We make mistakes, we learn, we integrate. But the narcissist's self-perception isn't flexible. It's rigid, inflated, and brittle. It can't accommodate criticism, loss, or failure. That's why they react with rage or silence or desperate attempts to win you back, not because they love you in the way healthy people understand love, but because your withdrawal threatens the very structure they use to shield themselves from psychological disintegration. When you leave, you deliver a kind of existential blow. And the narcissist doesn't process this in a healthy or reflective way. Instead, they begin to fragment. They might try to quickly latch onto someone else, anyone who will prop them up. They might lash out with accusations or lies, or they might collapse inward into depression or inertia. But no matter the behavior, the core reality is the same. Without the reflective mirror of your presence, they can no longer uphold the grandiose version of themselves they've spent years constructing. This is where your power lies. Not in revenge, not in retaliation, but in refusal. Refusal to participate in the illusion. Refusal to be used as a prop. Refusal to keep pretending that what they gave you was real when it wasn't. And that refusal, when it's rooted in clarity and not bitterness, is what causes the whole psychological house of cards to come crashing down. It's a tragic thing to witness, especially if you're someone who once loved or cared for them. But part of maturity, part of growth is realizing that compassion doesn't mean self-sacrifice. You can feel sorrow for someone's pain without letting them drag you back into it. And sometimes the most powerful act of love toward yourself, and strangely enough, even toward them, is to stop feeding the lie, because only then is truth possible. So, if you've walked away and you've stayed away and you've chosen your sanity over their chaos, don't be surprised when the silence speaks louder than your words ever did, because in that silence they hear something terrifying, the crumbling echo of the self they never really built. And that is the beginning of their downfall, not because you destroyed them, but because you stopped holding up the lie. And you stopped reacting, you stopped playing the game. And this is perhaps one of the most disorienting experiences for a narcissist, because what they feed on, what sustains them, is not love, not trust, not connection, but reaction. Your anger, your confusion, your attempts to explain or defend or fix, it all keeps the cycle alive. But when your reactions go quiet, when you become emotionally still in the face of their provocations, something shifts. For the first time, they're not in control of the narrative. They're not steering the dynamic. And for someone who has built their identity on manipulation and emotional leverage, that's terrifying. Now, let's be precise here. Emotional detachment is not indifference, and it's certainly not cruelty. It's clarity. It's the clarity that comes when you recognize that you are no longer required to be a character in someone else's psychological drama. You no longer need to justify your emotions, explain your pain, or rationalize the absurd. You see it for what it is, a pattern of dysfunction designed to keep you entangled, always off balance, always second-guessing your worth. In this emotional stillness, it is not weakness. It's the exact opposite. It is the result of tremendous inner work. You don't get there by accident. You get there by confronting the truth of what's been happening, by grieving the illusion of what you hope the relationship could be, by facing the fear of being alone, by reclaiming your autonomy one painful step at a time. It's a form of psychological maturity that the narcissist cannot comprehend because it comes from an integrated self, a self that no longer needs approval to know its value. This lack of reaction destabilizes the narcissist profoundly. Without your emotional responses to bounce off of, they begin to flounder. They try harder to provoke you through guilt, through insults, through charm, but it all starts to feel hollow, like a magician performing for an audience that's already walked out. And they know it. What's more, this emotional neutrality forces them to confront something they've spent their whole life avoiding, the absence of real connection. Because you can't control someone who's no longer emotionally invested. You can't manipulate someone who no longer needs anything from you. And that's when the narcissist truly feels powerless. Not because you've attacked them, but because you've removed your emotional availability and with it their ability to define themselves through your reactions. It's an unsettling thing for them because the narcissist is fundamentally empty, and emptiness despises stillness. Emptiness needs noise, needs drama, chaos, conflict, anything to distract from the silence of its own inner void. So when you stop reacting, you're no longer contributing to the noise. You become a mirror reflecting nothing back. And in that stillness, they are forced to face what they are without you. This is not about vengeance, it's about reclaiming your peace. Because the most devastating thing you can do to someone who depends on your emotional turmoil is to become calm, unshakably calm. That kind of calm is magnetic. It's strong, it's sovereign, and it signals something profound, that you no longer belong to their world. So if you've reached that place, if you've found that quiet strength within you, don't doubt its power. It may not look like triumph, but it is. It's the kind of triumph that doesn't need to shout. Because when the narcissist sees that you're no longer reacting, they finally realize that they've lost not just control, but relevance. In the end, silence is not empty. It's full of everything they can no longer touch. One of the most psychologically jarring moments for a narcissist is when you begin to live authentically. When you make choices that are not filtered through their control or influence. Because for the narcissist, your independence isn't just inconvenient, it's a threat to the very structure of the distorted reality they've built. You were never meant to have your own desires, your own dreams, your own voice. You were meant to orbit them, to reflect back their inflated sense of self. But when you stop doing that, when your life starts expanding beyond the walls they tried to build around you, they begin to unravel. You see, narcissistic control isn't always overt. It's not always about shouting or visible manipulation. Often it's subtle. It's the quiet undermining of your confidence, the calculated sowing of doubt, the constant shifting of goalposts, so that you're always chasing approval and never quite arriving. It's emotional conditioning, and it's designed to keep you small, because a small version of you is easier to manage, easier to dismiss, easier to dominate. But once you start to wake up to this, truly wake up, it becomes impossible to unsee. The lies, the gaslighting, the double standards, the emotional whiplash. It no longer feels like love, it feels like control. And you begin to see that the love you were giving was never truly received. It was consumed, absorbed into a black hole of need. never reciprocated, never honored. So what happens when you break free of that cycle? When you start choosing based on your values? When you pursue a career they mocked, reconnect with friends they isolated you from, dress the way you like, speak your mind without fear of backlash. What happens is this: the narcissist is confronted with a version of you they can't and reality is something they've spent a lifetime running from. But it's important to understand what's happening on a psychological level here. The narcissist doesn't just want admiration, they need it to function. Their entire identity is built externally. There's no inner scaffolding. So when someone who once validated them now exists freely, confidently, without their permission or praise, it creates an identity crisis. It challenges the very delusion they cling to, that they are the center of gravity in every relationship. And here's where it gets fascinating. Because your authenticity, your healing, your growth, it exposes them. Not publicly necessarily, but internally. It's a mirror they can't bear to look into because it reveals their emotional immaturity, their emptiness, their inability to form genuine connection. That's why they'll often try to discredit your change, mock your progress, or even mimic your transformation in a shallow attempt to regain control. But it doesn't work because authenticity can't be faked. And deep down, they know it. The truth is, living authentically isn't just an act of self-liberation. It's a form of psychological resistance. It says, you no longer define me. You no longer set the terms of my reality. And that message hits deeper than any confrontation ever could. So if you're on that path, if you're stepping into your truth, even when it's messy, even when it's scary, don't turn back. Keep going. Because every step you take away from falsehood is a step toward freedom. And the more rooted you become in your own reality, the less power the narcissist has over you. In the end, your authenticity isn't just your recovery, it's their reckoning. So what happens when you break free of that cycle? When you start choosing based on your values? When you pursue a career they mocked? Reconnect with friends they isolated you from? Dress the way you like? Speak your mind without fear of backlash? What happens is this: the narcissist is confronted with a version of you they can't reach, and they hate it. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because you're doing something real. And reality is something they've spent a lifetime running from. It's important to understand what's happening on a psychological level here. The narcissist doesn't just want admiration, they need it to function. Their entire identity is built externally. There's no inner scaffolding. So when someone who once validated them now exists freely, confidently, without their permission or praise, it creates an identity crisis. It challenges the very delusion they cling to, that they are the center of gravity in every relationship. And here's where it gets fascinating. Because your authenticity, your healing, your growth, it exposes them. Not publicly necessarily, but internally. It's a mirror they can't bear to look into because it reveals their emotional immaturity, their emptiness, their inability to form genuine connection. That's why they'll often try to discredit your change, mock your progress, or even mimic your transformation in a shallow attempt to regain control. But it doesn't work because authenticity can't be faked. And deep down, they know it. The truth is, living authentically isn't just an act of self-liberation. It's a form of psychological resistance. It says, you no longer define me. You no longer set the terms of my reality. And that message hits deeper than any confrontation ever could. So if you're on that path, if you're stepping into your truth, even when it's messy, even when it's scary, don't turn back. Keep going. Because every step you take away from falsehood is a step toward freedom. And the more rooted you become in your own reality, the less power the narcissist has over you. In the end, your authenticity isn't just your recovery, it's their reckoning. There comes a profound psychological reckoning for the narcissist when they realize that not only have you walked away, but you are thriving without them. For someone whose entire identity is rooted in dominance, illusion, and emotional dependence, nothing is more destabilizing than seeing the person they once controlled step into autonomy, wholeness, and genuine peace. That success, your success, becomes a mirror, and what they see reflected is not admiration or validation, but the glaring absence of their relevance. The narcissist's self-worth is parasitic. They do not generate it internally because they lack the structures necessary for authentic self-reflection and growth. Instead, they feed off the validation of others, particularly those they can dominate. Your suffering, your confusion, your attempts to please them, those were affirmations of their power. But when you're no longer affected by them, when your life begins to unfold without their shadow looming over it, something inside them begins to fracture. This isn't merely about envy, although that is certainly part of it. It's deeper than that. It's existential. The narcissist experiences your success as a kind of betrayal, not because you've done anything wrong, but because your joy invalidates the narrative they've constructed, the one where you were dependent, where you were broken, where you needed them to make sense of yourself. Your freedom rewrites that story in real time, and in doing so, it erases the myth they depended on to feel superior. Imagine what it means, psychologically, to watch someone you tried to dismantle become stronger in the aftermath of your departure. To see them reclaim their voice, reconnect with their passions, and rebuild their relationships. Not in spite of you, but precisely because they were finally free from you. For the narcissist, that's not just painful, it's annihilating, because they realize they were never the center of your world. You were just made to believe they were. There's something incredibly powerful in reclaiming your narrative. Not in the loud, performative sense that the narcissist might expect or fear, but in the quiet, grounded way that comes from actual healing. You stop needing to explain, you stop trying to be understood, you simply live. And in that living, you model something radical, a life that is self-cantitional. That's what the narcissist can't touch. They can provoke, they can manipulate, but they can't create. And they certainly can't be who you've become. Success, in this context, isn't just about external markers. Not just the new job or the healthier relationship or the calm that now permeates your home. It's the psychological shift. You are no longer internally fragmented. You've integrated the parts of yourself that were once disowned under the weight of their manipulation. And now you walk with a kind of coherence that makes their chaos irrelevant. That's the real blow. And of course, they'll try to reinsert themselves. That's predictable. They may use nostalgia, guilt, or even the illusion of self-awareness. But none of it will land because you've changed the receiver. You've rewired the way you relate to yourself and the world. Their old tricks don't work on this new frequency. And that's when it truly hits them. They have no access to the person you've become. So let your healing speak louder than any confrontation. Let your joy be the closing argument. Because when you thrive beyond their reach, you deliver the one message they're least equipped to handle. You never needed them to become whole. You only needed to remember who you were before they tried to make you forget. There's a particular kind of silence that terrifies the narcissist. And it's not the kind born of stonewalling or passive aggression. It's the silence that comes from indifference. True, settled indifference. When a super empath reaches the point where the narcissist no longer evokes emotion, no anger, no pain, not even disappointment, that is when the narcissist realizes they've lost something far more valuable than control. They've lost significance. And for someone whose entire sense of self revolves around being the center of someone else's universe, that loss is unbearable. You see, narcissistic control doesn't always depend on proximity. Even after a relationship ends, they'll often try to linger in the background of your mind through memories, emotional triggers, or attempts at intermittent contact. They want to know they still matter, that they still affect you. And for a while, they usually do. Because healing isn't instantaneous. Emotional dependency doesn't vanish overnight. But over time, if you've done the inner work, if you've reestablished your values, boundaries, and sense of self, that emotional hook loses its grip. And that's when something subtle but powerful occurs. You simply stop caring. That shift isn't rooted in resentment. It's not reactive. It's not, I'll show them. It's deeper than that. It's the moment when your nervous system no longer flinches at the thought of them. When your mind doesn't spiral back into replaying the past. When your energy isn't invested in understanding their pathology or trying to decode their next move. You're not just free from them. You're free of them. That distinction is everything. From a psychological standpoint, indifference signals emotional closure. It means your identity is no longer entangled with theirs, that you're no longer functioning in a trauma bond, nor seeking validation from someone fundamentally incapable of offering it. And philosophically, it means you've reclaimed authorship over your life. You're no longer reacting to the past. You're creating the future. That is existentially devastating for a narcissist. Because to the narcissist, your detachment isn't just a loss of supply, it's a negation of their entire persona. They can't tolerate irrelevance. They would rather be hated than forgotten because hatred still affirms that they exist in your emotional landscape. But when they're met with silence, not the kind that punishes, but the kind that communicates complete detachment, it's like standing in front of a mirror and seeing nothing reflected back. For someone who survives off reflection, that's a kind of death. This is why the narcissist may often try one last desperate attempt to provoke you, an emotional ambush, an unexpected apology, or even a smear campaign. But they're not looking for reconciliation. They're looking for reaction, any reaction. Because to them, being part of your world in any form, even as the villain, is better than being cast out of it entirely. But you've evolved beyond that. And that evolution is not accidental. It's the result of courage, discipline, and a deep commitment to truth. You chose to confront the lies, both theirs and your own. You chose to stop participating in the fantasy. And now you exist in reality, where peace is earned, not performed. That's the final nail in the narcissist's illusion. When their game no longer entertains you, they're left playing alone. So, if you ever wonder whether you've truly healed, ask yourself this: do they still have the power to affect your peace? If the answer is no, then understand your silence is not empty. It is full of strength, full of resolve, and full of truth. And that, more than anything, is what undoes the narcissist completely.